Welcome everybody to the August Town Hall, the Beagle Alliance August Town Hall. We are recording and we will have this up on our site later this week. So welcome. My name is Lori Cohen. I am the director of the Beagle Alliance. We have Mary Pryor, who is our rescue and volunteer director and also the co-founder of Cage to Couch Rescue in California. And of course, we have our three special guests from Justify. I will introduce them individually, and then of course, we're going to let them take it away. We're pretty casual here. We're completely open to questions and answers and comments later on. Throw them in the chat, raise your hand, whatever works. Mary and I will be watching to see who might have a question or comment. So we'll start with Maddie Krasno. Welcome. Maddie has been on one of our town halls previously. She's got an undergraduate education. She's worked at U of W's Madison Harlow Primate Research Laboratory, has been very open about her PTSD from that time and hopes that Justify will become the community that she wishes she had when she was at the lab. And she also holds a degree in humane education. Welcome, Maddie. Thank you. And dear Mallory, Cormier has been as well on one of our town halls quite a while ago. She holds a bachelor's degree in animal science and has worked in the veterinary field for over 10 years, working inside of numerous animal labs and afterwards founding Save the Buns, which is an animal sanctuary nonprofit organization who rescues bunnies from laboratory testing. Hi, Mallory. Welcome back. And Lindsay Oliver, welcome. Nice to meet you in Zoom person. This is our first time. Thank you for joining us. Lindsay's worked inside several animal research facilities and spent over a decade in helping whistleblowers share their stories. And Lindsay is a certified compassion fatigue professional and is passionate about helping others succeed and avoid the burnout that we know and we've heard about in laboratory testing and from animal care workers. So welcome all of you guys. I really appreciate you all being here. And I know it took a while for us to sort of get our schedules together so we could all be together. And welcome everybody else. Thank you for joining. Again, we see familiar names and faces and a lot of new faces and names, which we really appreciate. So I'm going to start by asking you three a little bit about your individual experiences. So maybe I'll just start from the top with you, Maddie. Tell us a little bit about your experience and what kind of led you to this part of your journey.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us and for your patience with getting this started. So I worked for 2 years at Harlow Primate Lab in the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I was a student at the time. My involvement, as some of you know, was because I loved primates and was fascinated by them, but really didn't know anything about animal research. And my job wasn't actually in animal research, it was animal care. So I was responsible for taking care of the 500 plus monkeys that were in the laboratory, one of 2 laboratories at the university. So this was like a part-time student job. And it didn't take long for me to kind of quickly start to question what was going on, but also feel like there wasn't anyone for me to talk to. It was an environment where, we were aware that there was sort of, if for some reason you were questioning something, you might be labeled an activist. And there was also a lot of kind of like gaslighting and self-doubt of, do I not really, am I wrong for feeling this way? So anyway, it was an interesting experience in the sense of like being such a young person thrown into what ended up being a really traumatic environment. And one where there's kind of no warning about that. And there's no kind of check-ins with these young impressionable students about what it's like to be controlling every aspect of these animals' lives, including, you know, from birth to death. So that, you know, was 2 years. It took me many years to get an official PTSD diagnosis, but I was definitely having symptoms right away. Nightmares, which actually still happen, unfortunately, though I handle them better now. Yay, therapy. But you know, it's been a journey for sure. But part of what has been really helpful is connecting with people like Mallory and Lindsay, which is, you know, we can talk a little more about in a bit, but it's how Justify was born. It was from, you know, former research workers like ourselves coming together and saying like, wow, it was really helpful to talk to you. There's probably others like us who need to do this too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're actually on the cusp of answering a question that's going to be my next question after you all introduce. So Mallory, go ahead. I know a little bit about your story, but please share.
Hello there. Hey guys. Thanks for being here. I'm very excited. And per usual, I'm always nervous with these things, but shake it off. So my background is primarily with rabbits. I worked in a facility, all rabbits, for about 2.5 years. Like Maddie, I did have some exposure when I was in college, but the rabbit facility was my first job in the animal research field. Prior to that, I was working as a vet tech. So I kind of came into that environment with that background of a veterinary, with veterinary experience. It took me a little while to, you know, see how things were in that environment. And a lot of times I thought it was because of my veterinary background that I was having a hard time with it, because it was such a different way of treating animals. But ultimately that experience was also traumatizing. And I've recently, actually, probably within the last couple months, have been diagnosed with PTSD too, from that experience working with the rabbits. And coming together with Lindsay and Maddie kind of opened that door a little bit too, because I was thinking, God, am I going crazy? But I kind of jumbling around a little bit, but my main focus really, you know, right now is a lot of rescue with Save the Buns as my side gig, which is my nonprofit, rescuing rabbits from animal testing. And that's been a huge help with healing from that experience. All of the things that I wish I could have done for those rabbits, now I can. And actually seeing the change in their behavior and essentially rehabbing them, because they are going through that stage from being in the lab to now being in a home setting, is very rewarding. So that's probably the most healing that I've done through that experience. And then how that relates with Justify is also I have a couple members of Save the Buns, and we all work together in the rabbit facility, and we all had very similar experiences. So they're not as forthcoming with their experiences. Everybody has their own journey, so I try not to probe too much on that, but that also kind of sparked a little bit the fuel behind Justify, because I know they've opened up to me about their experience, and I mean, hopefully one day they will. But you know, it's multiple people all having the same experience. There must be something going on there. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thanks. It must be very healing though, just working with the bunnies, of course, and you know.
Yeah, I have a new one, which I need to, you know, I can't save them all and keep them all in my house, but I have 3 now. I just acquired one more. His name is Turnip, and he's a sweet little man. He's been coming when I call him now, which is huge. He'll take treats from my hand, whereas before he would just hide the whole time. So, and I got him to do one binky, which was cool. So hopefully more to come.
Awesome. Thank you. And
Yeah.
Lindsay, welcome.
Yeah. Hi, Lori and everyone. Thanks so much for having me and us. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about these important issues that don't get talked about enough. So a little bit of background about me. I'll try to keep it short. Just as a warning, I'm still getting over getting sick, so you might hear a little scraggliness in my voice and a little sniffles. So yeah, please bear with me, or if something I said doesn't make sense, I'm still a little brain foggy, so just let me know. But yeah, ever since I was a kid, I was always drawn to helping animals. Even since before I can remember, my parents had already kind of made that connection for me of being drawn to animals. And so naturally, I wanted to be a veterinarian, as most kids who care about animals want to be when they grow up. And that path held true up until my early years in pre-veterinary medicine at Iowa State University. I'm originally from Iowa. And that's when I was exposed to a lot of the moral and ethical issues that took place, particularly at that time within the veterinary medicine field. And that was my first exposure to animal experimentation in a way that I didn't know and understand. And I felt very deflated at that time, because being a vet and helping animals was my dream, right? Like, it was the thing that I was working toward. And so I just felt like that wasn't the right path for me. It wasn't helping animals in the way that I wanted to help animals. Iowa State was also a very heavy animal agriculture college. And so when I thought about the path of making a difference for animals, that just something about it just didn't feel right. And so then I felt very lost throughout undergrad for a little bit, trying to figure out what that new path would look like. And so I ended up taking a little bit of a different turn, that a lot of that experience and things that I had experienced sort of growing up and been exposed to, just in terms of ways that we mistreat animals, motivated me to work to become an undercover animal cruelty investigator. And I worked in all different types of industries to just expose sort of various ways that we exploit animals. And a number of those were also inside animal experimentation labs. And what's interesting is my background is a little bit different from Mallory and Maddie's. So for me, I felt like I was prepared kind of going in for some of the things that I might see or witness or observe, but as prepared as I thought that I could have been, I wasn't at all. It threw me into emotional states that I didn't know that I could be in. The things that I witnessed with animals, it was just it was a world that I didn't realize before even going into it, even though I thought that I did, which also makes me think about the people who go into these fields, really genuinely wanting to help animals or help people, and recognize that they really don't have any idea kind of like what they're walking into. I've worked with all different types of animals in labs, and the connection that I made with those individuals, particularly those on long-term experiments, was just something I just hadn't experienced in that way. And I say long-term experiments because these individuals that are locked in these labs for years, sometimes decades, particularly primates, because primates tend to be part of the longer sort of research protocols. And I think about them every day. Like, they made such an impact on me and my life, and that emotional connection is just something that we really don't yet understand as a society about animals. And so one of the biggest takeaways as well for me is not only the animals experience, but the people experience of working inside these labs. Mm-hmm. So many of the employees who I worked with, and a lot of the animal caretakers, really voiced how much they didn't like what was going on. And that honestly surprised me, because I was, coming in to document, I was, sort of aware of it. And so I was actually surprised. A lot of people would voice things that they felt uncomfortable. They were sad about what was happening. Many people quit because they just couldn't handle what the experience was like. They thought they were going into it for a different reason, and were exposed to things that they weren't prepared for. And that's sort of what brings us to forming Justify, and really creating that space and that community for people to share and connect those to those shared experiences, and to recognize that that feeling is normal.
Yeah, thank you. That's just incredible. And it just goes to show you what you're saying about the people who work in there. I think they get a bad rap. We know they get a bad rap, right? And that's kind of what has brought all of us together, just in talking about these things. But I'm going to touch on that a little bit in a few minutes, if you guys are okay with that. But how did it happen in terms of, and I'll let whichever one of you wants to talk, or all of you, but how did you guys, just sort of get together? How did you guys come together? And I know that Mallory and I have known each other for quite a while. So, so all of a sudden you guys were together, and I was like, how did this happen? Where did you guys, what was the conversation like?
Well, I remember several years ago, a mutual friend of me and Lindsay's had told me to talk to Lindsay. And this was someone who had been really supportive of, you know, me starting to talk about my experience. I really hadn't talked much. And yeah, she was just like, you need to chat with Lindsay. And so, you know, there was that like awkward text conversation that's like, hey, do you want to set up a phone call? And I literally remember, actually, I think it was during the pandemic because I was back home in Minnesota. Yeah, so this wasn't that long ago. But I remember walking around the neighborhood and being on the phone for like an hour and a half. And it was just like so nice. You know, chatting with someone who understood what it was like to be in there, and what it was like to be on the outside after being in there. And then I don't know, Mallory, did you find me on the internet? What happened? How did we get connected?
I think that it's the same thing with Lindsay. I got connected with Lindsay through a mutual friend that knew you, but then I was kind of stalking you guys on social media.
Cool.
Like, and then I had a full-on girl crush on Lindsay because I was like,
naturally.
So yeah, and then we just all connected, and yeah, and then we started chit-chatting about, okay, we all have similar experiences of how our, you know, what we feel our experience was in that environment, and what we felt like after we left, because that was a big thing. I mean, there's the difference when you're in it, and then there's a difference once you leave, because there's like the guilt of leaving the animals, and you were the only one that did XYZ. I dealt with that a lot when I left. And then there really isn't, like, also looking afterwards, there wasn't really any like therapy option specific to that. So then we were talking like, okay, not that we're going to be like medical professionals helping diagnose people, is mainly like, you know, we wanted a safe spot. So then that kind of evolved, and yeah, now it's a thing.
And now it's a thing.
Yeah.
Now it's a thing.
It's funny. I feel like I have to comment after that. That what a kind.
How can you
sort of,
not, Lindsay? How can you not?
I know. I don't know how to respond to that. But yeah, I echo so much of that right back to Maddie and Mallory, and so grateful to have connected with these amazing individuals, and just admire you both, honestly, for you know, being courageous enough to speak out about your experiences. That's really hard to do, and that's, you know, part of what we're trying to do with Justify, is helping people feel comfortable to be able to talk about those, because talking about them and recognizing you know, the journey that it takes is part of that healing process. And so just really grateful to them for speaking out so boldly, and then really working to sort of like transform their lives by helping animals in a totally different way, which is really amazing. So yeah, grateful that we were all able to connect in really just interesting random ways.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's wonderful what you guys are doing. And I do want to talk a little bit about, you know, what's on your site and what, you know, some of the things that you're up to. But I have to ask you this question, because as we said in the beginning, animal care workers and people in general in laboratories where there's animal testing get a bad rap. And we all know that there's some bad apples in every you know, part of society and every industry. The Beagle Alliance in general has taken this stand that we're going to attempt to work with animal research facilities, and that we're not going to vilify them. We're acutely aware that the majority of people that go into the sciences and go into research, et cetera, and go into and want to be animal care workers, either want to help the animals or want to help humanity. But we do, and we've seen, especially on social media, the backlash that can happen. And even if you talk a little, even if we do a rescue and we post something and, you know, we're watching all the time because there's comments of, you know, burn them all down, and I think they should all be shot. And, you know, can get scary out there. And we're really cognizant of watching that we're not creating an environment that allows for that. And, you know, deleting them and getting rid of that if it happens. So that said, have you had any backlash? Has anybody come and made comments or emailed you or just said anything negative with regards to the fact that you did do that at one time, or you were working in that environment at one time?
I can kind of chime in and start that conversation. So in terms of working as an investigator, I certainly received some feedback. Now at that time, people didn't really know sort of like who that individual was, for example, but there was feedback of, you know, how can you be there witnessing sort of like this type of cruelty and sort of like not do something in the moment, or not like help or not rescue these animals. And so there were certainly comments like that would come out without really recognizing the because these are systemic issues, right? And so as much as I really wanted to kind of draw attention to things as they happened, it would not have helped in the moment, because these are things that happen every single day. And so part of being able to create that change is sustaining sort of some of that suffering that goes on, to be able to document those stories and tell them. But there's definitely, you know, everyone comes from all different backgrounds and experiences, and that sort of shapes how they perceive information. And so I think it's just so much about education and connecting and really recognizing that different people come from different spaces. And yeah, but there is definitely that tone as well within you know, different communities of sort of throwing hate on individuals who might work in this industry, for example, because they don't support, or they've seen some cruel things that come out. But again, it comes back to really just recognizing that we're all here as people with feelings and emotions, and trying to help guide those the best that we can. But I think that can be one of honestly the toughest places, particularly for lab workers. And then I'll let Mallory and Maddie chime in. But for those working in labs, that was, I think, one of the biggest issues that I ran into, is that people would sort of vent these things or concerns, but they didn't know where to go to. There wasn't really like an outlet of like, well, I don't know who I can connect to, because the lab sort of, you know, views this way. And then in terms of sort of like animal rights activists, things like that, there's like an internal perception of having fears of like what that might look like. And so I think that it puts people in labs in really difficult positions, honestly.
Agreed. Thank you. It's interesting. Mallory and Maddie, what about you? Even while you were, you know, working in that environment, how did you feel about some of the activists or advocates and their opinions, blanket opinions, I guess you could call them?
Yeah. I mean, during my actual time there, I guess off the top of my head, I can't say that like I had any friends who would say like identify as an animal rights activist. So the feedback that I would generally get was like, oh, that's so awesome, you get to play with monkeys all day. And you know, it like, I get that it sounds cool because monkeys are amazing, but that was not what was going on. And so it was just sort of this like thing that I kind of just like laughed off. Sometimes went home and like cried. So I mean, my awareness while I was in the lab was sort of what Lindsay was saying, was that it was just like, I don't really know who I could talk to about this. And so I'll just like kind of not talk to anyone and live two different lives. One is the Maddie that's in the research laboratory, and the other is the one who's like double majoring and volunteering with children and babysitting. And I mean, literally compartmentalizing was what I became very good at. I mean, I definitely remember people like being aware of like the stigma of animal activists, but I didn't have super strong feelings. I just knew that like if somehow I got labeled as one, then it's like, well, you're out. And I was like, well, do I want to be out? Because I don't really like this, but I also need a letter of recommendation. And, you know, who else is going to take care of these animals the way that I do? And so you're just kind of like, there's all this internal going on. And then, you know, fast forward to me actually speaking out about things. I have had some, I mean, I laugh, but it's like horrifying things said to me by animal rights activists. Like, you deserve PTSD. Like, yeah, literally. There's screenshots somewhere in my phone. Just for the sake of like showing that like this is what people are gonna face. You know, even if what they're doing is speaking out about this and trying to stand up, not just for the animals, but, you know, young, impressionable people, whoever, who's in this industry, and then, you know, starts to get really traumatized. Like, who do you have to turn to? And so yeah, that's really hard. And it's still like, I will say, like, Justify itself, I kind of handled most of the like social media stuff. And I think I've only deleted like 1 or 2 comments that, you know, might like kind of border on like demonizing, but nothing has been that bad. We do have like a social media statement, which I'm sure people don't necessarily read, but overwhelmingly, at least so far, those who know about Justify have been really, really supportive, which has been wonderful.
Awesome.
Outside of like, you know, what Justify is, there's still other things happening, but I think that's really promising, because that means that so far we are creating this community. And I know that as much as there's lab workers, former and current, who follow us, there's also animal rights activists, just, you know, and just people in general who agree with what we're doing and support it. And that is, you know, that is our goal. So Mallory, I don't know if you've got stuff you want to say.
I got a little something. That's great, guys. Good feedback, Maddie and Lindsay. I guess for me, my experience in a nutshell, I shared the you know, it was challenging morally, because, you know, you're going there every day and you're trying to kind of I don't know, get through it. I mean, that's part of it. It comes to that. And then the other part is you become kind of advocates for the animals that are in your care. Because I was a veterinary care team lead. So that my job was to oversee all the veterinary issues. So I saw a lot of medical problems with the rabbits, which that's taxing in itself. But I felt responsible for those rabbits and I wanted to be there for them. I knew that, you know, no, like, not to toot my own horn, but I knew that I cared for those rabbits well. I went above and beyond. I made sure they were comfy. I wasn't doing anything to them that would harm them. I was healing them in my eyes, because I was helping care for them. Wasn't, you know, I was helping fix the injuries and things. So it was definitely a mind, like, I don't swear, but it was definitely like it screwed with your mind when you were there. The other thing is, while I was working, you know, talking with friends or family, like, oh, what do you do for work? That was a little bit of an awkward conversation sometimes, because I went again from the veterinary background and then I went to lab. That was a big, like, in the veterinary field, you got judged for that big time. And the reason why I took the job was because I was trying to move out of my dad's house. I was working at an emergency hospital with, you know, staying 3 hours past my shift, which, you know, I do anything for animals, but it's hard to live like that. And also pay, I couldn't afford to be a vet tech. So that opportunity jumped in and I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, because it seemed pretty benign. I know that sounds funky, but it was a breeding operation. So I was like, oh, I can help care for rabbits in a breeding operation. I have my own opinions about breeding in general, but maybe I can do this. But when I talked to people, I always had to justify what I was doing. You know, bringing up like, oh, it's for the greater good, or I'm helping humans, or, you know, there was always like, it was like I was saying it to make myself believe it. And then I would say, just like, you know, one other little thing in there. One of the other clicks when I was at the lab, that pushed me out the door, on top of all the other things, you know, about seeing the animals and everything like that, was that there was a company maybe a couple towns over that was doing the exact same thing we were doing, but without animals. They were doing it with like a type of artificial cell kind of thing. So it was like, that blew my mind, because I was like, all of this damage that's happening, and they're doing the same thing, and we don't even have to harm all these creatures. So that was really eye-opening. But overall, my last little, I don't know how many times I said that, but another interaction that I've had with people that like I do the save the buns on the side, as I mentioned, like when I have conversations with people about, we rescue rabbits, and the reason behind it is because we all used to work in that field. You see a shift in their face once they realize that you used to work there, you used to work in the animal research field. So sometimes I get that initial judgment of like, ooh, ew. But then I say, you know, it's, yes, it's a part of my life that I'm not too happy about. But if I didn't have it, then I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now, which is helping animals, and I'm helping people that are in that field to spread awareness about it. So that's my last little spiel there. But
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think what you guys are doing is amazing. And I just, I probably sound like a broken record. I've disclosed to everybody that I used to be in corrections, and your story resonates so much with me because it's everything I could say about corrections and my experience there of compartmentalizing, having PTSD, going into it thinking I'm going to help people, living a double life, trying to justify how people are being treated, the backlash of after I left and spoke out. I mean, it's literally a mirror, but what really is the thing that impresses upon me when I think about that mirror is that the majority of people housed in jail are guilty. And of course, we know that the animals are innocent. And that's a glaring, that's a big thing right there. So I amazing for you guys. Maddie, I know that we're going to see some slides of yours in a few minutes, but let me just ask you guys, because on your site, on your homepage, and I'm going to copy some of these links in for all of our guests so that you can, you know, check out their website and join their newsletter. We'll pop some links in there. So what we do, raise awareness, of course, building a community, storytelling, and inspiring action. So can one of you speak to maybe the inspiring action piece, and one of you maybe to the storytelling? And by that, I mean, have you had a specific story that maybe another animal care worker reached out and felt the way you guys did alone, and then found you guys and maybe shared a story without disclosing anything personal? I'm just curious if something really, if there's a story that really impacted one or all of you.
Oh, I'll get us going here. So I will say that, you know, one of the caveats here is we're relatively new. When did we launch, everyone? I don't know, earlier this year sometime.
January?
Yeah, what'd you say?
January-ish, right?
January-ish, and it's August. Okay, cool. Happy, I don't know, 7 months to us or something. So yeah, that being said, it's, you know, this is still very, very new, which means we're still very much growing our community and sort of figuring out like how we're going to do everything we want to do, knowing that each of us has very full-time jobs, and even full-time jobs on top of other things like Save the Buns. So anyway, this is not a full-time gig, so we can only dedicate so much to it right now. But in terms of like just so far, I would say with Justify, you know, a lot of, I mean, and I have to say a lot of it's not organized in my brain, but over the course of, I would say, the last couple years, there's just been a number of people who have reached out, either just like through like personally to my Instagram or through Justify, to either just kind of say like, oh, I'm glad you're here, or to actually kind of go into some detail, some level of like, you know, I mean, there's one individual that's coming to mind where it was like one of those things where they just said like, I just felt like so understood when I read this post of yours where you were talking about your experience, and I just like came across it randomly through, you know, hashtags or whatever it is on Instagram. And getting that feedback kind of over and over again has been, you know, really validating to what we are trying to do. I will say that like at this point, I think that there's people who are interested in kind of starting to do a little more. But at the same time, we're not trying to kind of like push anyone to do anything they're not comfortable with. And so like, I mean, you know, for me, it took like what, 8 years before I was like publicly talking about this, 7 years, something like that. Obviously, you know, that could have changed a lot had I been in contact with other people who understood my experience, which is again, where we come in. But I mean, I can actually share right now. Let me see if I can figure this out. I had for one of our slides here, a quote. Can you all see this? Is this showing up for you?
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay. Awesome. So yeah, I mean, this was just a, you know, a message that someone sent that says, hi, I randomly found your account, but wanted to reach out. I also worked in primate research and left after several years. I was in animal care, a lab, and then behavior management before reaching my mental limit and leaving in 2016. So there's a lot I haven't dealt with from that time, but some of your posts have resonated with me. I have felt very alone in my experiences, especially after leaving abruptly and feeling very guilty for having even been there in the first place. Thank you so much for sharing your posts. So, you know, this is just one example of, you know, many that are out there, and hopefully many more to come. Yeah. I don't know if Mallory or Lindsay, you've got anything to chime in about there.
Sure, I'll chime in. Thanks for that, Maddie. And kudos to Maddie, who really does handle a lot of our most of our social media and engagements with individuals who are coming in and responding to those, which takes a lot of emotional energy and effort, right? Of hearing other people's experiences. It's helpful, but it's also, you know, it's also brings us back to kind of like that space again. And so, yeah, I think for me, I think what's compelling is that more people than I thought have these types of experiences, and even just like in connecting with different types of people, or, you know, when the topic comes up, whether in medical school, vet school, just working different part-time jobs, ended up just getting into like, you know, having a job as a tech, wanted to take the research path in different ways. Like there's so many different kind of paths that can connect people into working in animal research in some capacity or another. And for me, that's the compelling component because the vast majority, the stories are the same, right? Like when Maddie reads that quote from that individual, like it just really resonates with me, and particularly in there, what was mentioned about the guilt element as well. Guilt is such a heavy part of this field that there's so many different emotions that people don't expect to feel, and you know, it's the guilt of working in the environment, it's the guilt of not working in the environment as well, because for me there was a heavy guilt of leaving those animals. I was like, I'm just leaving them with you know, in this horrible place. And of course there isn't another pathway. Oftentimes I was grateful enough to be able to rescue some individual animals, which you know, as Mallory talked about, is really, you know, a healing part of that, of just making, for me, so much of it was like, if I can just make a difference in one of these individuals' lives, that really sort of like helped me. But a lot of times we don't get that opportunity, particularly in primate labs. So yeah, so I think that's just the big takeaway, is that there are so many stories out there that can really continue to help you know, people with what's going on. And then also you know, just for us to talk about the necessity of the work in general as well.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you for that. Maddie, do you want to go ahead with your slides now if you're ready for that?
You know, I don't know that there's really any others that need to be shown. They were sort of more of a general. I mean, one has our mission statement, if you want to see that. But generally speaking, yeah, we're kind of just like open to a casual Q&A or talking
Okay.
about whatever everyone wants
Okay.
to talk about.
Perfect. Okay. And thank you, Mary. I see Mary's has put in the link for everybody if they want to go ahead and visit the Justify site. So I'm going to look at the chat, but if anybody wants to put their Zoom hand up, by all means, we can, whether you have comments or questions for either one, any of the three, whatever you guys want to go with, but I'm just going to go through here. Oh, I see Josh. Yes, thank you. No, it was definitely technical difficulties on our end. So thank you again for everyone for your patience. Apologies. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but at least we're all together and everybody could join. So thank you. I see Isabel has chickens. That's awesome.
So I know Shreya has her hand up, and then I also actually have a little anecdote that I could share before we get into questions. That kind of ties back to this whole kind of feedback on the internet thing and just feedback in general. Because one of my favorite pastimes, not really, is to find people on the internet who are demonizing animal lab workers. And try to get them to think critically, differently about the situation, because I mean, I'm seeing that more and more in just like media these days. There's been a lot of talk about what's going on in animal research, and actually more articles coming out from people who have worked in labs or are being talking about compassion fatigue. I know that's kind of like a thing that labs are starting to dip their toes into, so to speak. Anyway, there was on Twitter, there was an article that was shared related to this, and one person was saying that it's like, it's really hard not to demonize. How can you engage in positions like this and do what they do? It's simply unfathomable to hurt helpless creatures, torture them, kill them for what? And someone else said, like, I agree, there's no amount of money in the world that would compel me to take a job experimenting on primates or any other innocent animal. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. The guilt would be too overwhelming, and, yada, yada, yada. So I chimed in, and one of the things I asked was, have you both been vegan your entire lives? Because based on what they're saying, it was clear that they were animal rights activists. And I said, if not, you've participated in harming animals, and in a world that has normalized violence, especially violence towards animals, it's vital we invite people to change and take a stance against this violence. It's not going to help us to write them off. Like, if we're expecting people to change, no matter, what it is we're trying to get people to change, to think differently, we have to invite them to. One of these two individuals actually ended up completely flipping a switch, sharing about Justify, sharing about like an op-ed that I had written about my experience, saying how grateful they were about me speaking out. One of them refused, and that's okay. But the point is that, I think there's this kind of knee-jerk reaction to just be like, oh, I could never do that. And if people aren't given the opportunity to think about it and to hear from people like us, it's a lot easier to have that knee-jerk reaction and to continue having that reaction. So I just, I found that optimistic, that, or like uplifting, that, I was able to help this person kind of see that, yeah, it sucks to see animals harmed, and it's hard to imagine being in this position. But as Lindsay said, these are systemic issues. Like, this is, as much as I did things that I regret in the primate lab, I also felt like you know, there was this pressure on me that, you know, I had to act a certain way, which is then going to affect them. And you're afraid to go up against the powers that be. And that's how these systems work. And that's how they're successful. If they can keep us quiet and keep us from sort of trying to discuss what's going on, then it's going to be a lot harder to question, instead of just justify. So anyway.
No, thank you for that. And I think that's an awesome response. I think it's time that we as humans acknowledge that we all harm and have harmed animals. We could all jump around all day long and point fingers and decide that somebody's done more harm than we have and justify and I think that's the important point, is that we've all purchased cosmetics, we've all purchased cleaning products, we've all, you know, cleared land and built houses. We're all, for the most part in North America, you know, we all have spent our lives eating animals. We have all taken over-the-counter drugs. We've all been vaccinated. I mean, there is not one of us who is, there's still harming going on. And so I think it's really important to meet people where they are, to say, well, what can we do for animals now? What is within our individual belief system and scope that we can make a difference, and be compassionate, because this is the human race. There is no perfection here. So, you know, I just love that response, and awesome that somebody reflected on that and got back to you. So great. That's all you can hope for. Sharia, I hope I'm saying your name correctly.
Yeah.
You know, you've had your hand up for a little bit. Go ahead.
No, you got it. You got it. Thank you. First off, great talk. I always enjoy listening to Maddie talk, and I'm excited that I got to hear the rest of the Justified team as well. So thank you for that. And I guess my question is, and I know Maddie probably knows what I'm going to ask because I've talked to her about this quite a bit, but what could animal protection and animal rights groups do to provide a safer space for folks who have had these experiences, who are currently trapped within that animal industrial complex, so to speak, to come forward and to actually collaborate and work alongside these animal advocacy groups? So outside of a whistleblower capacity. So I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on that. Thanks.
Well, Maddie, since you were mentioned, I'll chime in and start on that one. Yeah, really great question, by the way, Shreya. Really nice to meet you. Thanks for joining and asking that question. I think asking that question is really the start of having these conversations, right? Of just recognize, because that opens that door, right? Of recognizing, okay, how can we create that safer space for people to open up and to talk? Because it is definitely, particularly inside labs, I feel like there's sort of like a sort of like us and them kind of mentality. And that's why anyone who starts to question things on the inside feels like, well, I'm either here or I'm over here, and that's bad to be over here. And so there isn't sort of that space where people feel that they can often kind of go to. So what we've kind of talked about of being the most helpful sort of approach is really just coming at that from that inclusive, non-judgmental sort of welcoming space, which you know, as we talked about with some of the comments and things, people can feel very passionately on one side or another, and, you know, throw out really, you know, judgmental or even downright very mean and hurtful comments. And so really trying to, you know, just create that sort of open space that that people can see, okay, I can come here and ask questions. I might not know everything. I might support animal research. I might, you know, have all these different opinions, but also feel like I can come to this community and come to these people and not feel judged. And, you know, they'll understand kind of that, you know, everyone's sort of like on a different journey. And I think that's the biggest thing, is recognizing, especially just commenting on what Maddie, what you and Maddie and Lori were talking about sort of that that kind of awareness standpoint, and recognizing, you know, like, no one is perfect. We're all, you know, learning and trying to do our best in this world, and judging and hating on other people is never going to have the progress that we want to make.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharia. I'm just going to go through the questions. I don't see anybody else's hand unless I'm mistaken. But Rachel is asking in the chat, is there any research facilities that do offer support to staff? Does this support sometimes position around you are doing this for the common good kind of approach? Have any of you three heard of any laboratories with some sort of support for staff in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I can't name a specific lab at this point. I don't know if Mallory can, but they're starting to write articles and talk about compassion fatigue training that they are offering in certain labs. But as you said, Rachel, I think the thing about it is the framing is, you know, whereas we make it clear that, like, we're not here to justify animal experimentation. Ultimately, unless this compassion fatigue training is being done by someone who's a complete third party and not invested in keeping these individuals in research, then what is going on is going to be probably trying to encourage them to feel better about what they're doing, and not like necessarily think like, oh, if you're feeling this bad about this, if this is harming you in this way, maybe it's not the right thing to be doing. So I think that's kind of the difference. There's a specific article that came out recently, and there were even, I think, examples of, like, they were doing some like memorial thing for some of the animals that they euthanized. Yeah. And it just very strange, because, like, if you think about it, like, yeah, that sounds like a really nice practice, like, for people in a sanctuary when the animals they've rescued and cared for pass away, like, memorialize them. But there's something particularly, I don't know, icky about, like, doing the same thing for these animals that we've bred into existence and then killed for, you know, our own reasoning. So I think that labs are starting to pick up on that people are exiting and they want to stop it. But, you know, I wouldn't say that whatever is going to be happening is going to be necessarily helping them exit. If anything, it's going to probably be trying to keep them from exiting.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with Maddie that it probably won't be for the actual benefit of, like, they don't want people to leave, obviously.
Right.
So I will say, for my experience working at the rabbit facility, they did actually do a compassion fatigue training, because there were actually multiple people coming forward refusing to do the euthanasias. I was one of them. I said, I can't do it anymore, I'm not doing it. And that was a very difficult conversation. So once somebody stopped doing it, then there were more people that stopped doing it. And I also was very, very open with my manager, expressing that I'm having a really hard time. It kind of was like a gradual progression when I was there. And then all of a sudden it was like, I'm done. But they did actually, they did a program that was 2 sessions. And the feedback I remember hearing from that was that it actually made things worse for people, because then they actually were brought back to, like, oh, this is not where I want to be. I don't know if I can work here. So in some ways it was, I don't know, however you want to look at it. But I will say that was I thought that was compassionate of the lab to provide that for the people working there. And then they also went and they gave, I believe it was a 6 to 8 week program for just me, because I was having a lot of issues becoming emotional at work. I was having like these crazy crying fits and disturbing my coworkers. So they said, hey, we don't want you to leave. Why don't you try this program? And that ultimately helped me come to terms with what was going on. And I did leave. That's the only lab experience that I know that offered that. But I know that for the veterinary field, they do that for compassion fatigue, but I don't know how beneficial it would be for the lab environment. But that's just my 2 cents.
I just wanted to say that article, I read it. And what was interesting to me is never once did they say, like, maybe the idea of releasing them when they're finished a study or something would help the morale of the lab workers the most. Like, the biggest thing they talked about to me in the article was that the workers, said that the hardest thing for them is that the animal would be euthanized, like while they were on vacation, and they came back, and then this animal that they'd worked with for 3 years was gone. And so, like, the biggest thing they put into effect was, like, they get told, like, that's going to be this huge help. And I kept waiting to read in it, like, releasing them would be the biggest thing. Like, that would be hugely comforting to them, to at least the ones that were still viable could be released and live out, whatever life they had left. So it didn't seem like, with the labs being in charge of the whole thing, like it was going to get very far for anybody, really, except for themselves, right? To stop worker turnover by convincing them that we do all this for you to help you,
Right. And the other thing about those articles that, all of these kind of were coming out at the same time, they would interview people who were having issues with animal research, but they didn't interview anyone who had left the industry. So, like, people like us who, like, we went through this, we left, we decided to do things differently. They did not contact anyone like us. As Justify, we commented on a lot of these social posts when they were sharing these articles saying, hey, like, we've got plenty of lab workers who could talk about our experiences too, and why we've decided to do X, Y, Z instead. And, crickets. So, it was very clear that it's like, oh, well, we can acknowledge that there might be this issue, but we're not going to take it to the degree of, like, wait, maybe we need to rethink this whole thing. So
yeah. I guess we can see a little glimmer of hope that they even acknowledge it, right?
yeah. I mean, I think that's a huge step. I think it's relatively new. I mean, Lindsay, I don't know, maybe you can speak better to that, but
yeah, that's I think I guess there's so many things to potentially comment on there. My brain is in a lot of different spaces, and also just talking about these things, right? It like triggers memories and things that I haven't thought about in a while as well, which is always really interesting. But yeah, so the labs that I worked in did not have compassion fatigue or anything that sort of like addressed those issues. I did work in a lab that had a sort of adoption program sent up for animals who weren't on terminal studies, that they would allow them to be adopted out. It was an interesting kind of space, because I think so much of the rescues that happen are driven by passionate individuals who work inside the labs, who have those connections with animals. They want to see them sort of live a different life outside of being trapped in a tiny cage and going through different experiments and things like that. So I really applaud those individuals who stand up and fight for those animals inside those environments, and for those who do rescue work, because that is a tough place, and creating a sanctuary for animals who have never experienced anything like that, and who really live the polar opposite life. It's a very, very few animals get to experience that. And it's just something that I'm so grateful for after seeing so many animals in polar opposite conditions. So yeah, I think it's also, the rescue thing is interesting, because I've had conversations with people where it's a bit of a contentious space, because the the rescue of them, the release, moving them to sanctuaries, things like that, that creates a story for that animal that came from inside a lab. And that then starts to create stories that are maybe not so favorable for lab environments from the lab's perspective. So I think that there are, you know, different sort of biases and really wanting to shift narratives from that we have to be kind of aware of as well. It's oftentimes not doing the right thing for the animals or individuals. It's sort of the right thing for the lab and the right thing to protect those spaces. It's an industry that is really driven by ambiguity and like protection of what we can't, you know, talk about. It's a very sort of like hidden kind of field, and they hide very much behind that.
Yeah, and Mary and I can speak to that, obviously, in our daily work. And in Canada, it's much more secretive than it even is in the United States. And we walk a very thin line on making sure that we just want, if you have animals that can be rehomed, we want to help with that. And we are willing to not talk about it with you, but, you know, still we get calls where, just as you say, Lindsay, a brave individual that wants to see better for the animals and wants to maybe adopt the animal out, reaches out, and, you know, 2 or 3 people later, the call comes to us. And if the laboratory finds out that it's a rescue organization, they all of a sudden have their own internal adoption. And I mean, we walk a thin line. Sometimes we get the dogs. Mary and I have seen where one day we're going to get some animals out, and the next day the lab has sold the animals to another study. And so now we know that they've been in the lab for a number of years, and now they're going to go for another, you know, 3 to 5 years, or however long the study may be, maybe not that long. But so it is very hidden and secretive, is just, I guess, my comment in something that the rescue world deals with. But thank you for that. Josh, I see your hand, Josh. I'm not ignoring you.
Oh no, I was just trying to leave it up to be patient. I don't
No,
want you to
please
think
do.
I
Yeah,
was
leave it up. Yeah,
losing
leave it up.
interest.
I'm going to try to go in order here. So, but I didn't want you to think that I did not see it, because that has happened.
Not at all.
So that has happened too. So hello, Miss Connie. I see. And thank you, Rachel, for your comments. You know, commenting and thanking. I know you'd thanked Maddie here for her answer. And hello, Miss Connie. I'm going to see you soon. Thank you for being here. The cosmetic ban in Canada, yes, is in fact just cosmetics. And although it a start, and it did bring awareness, the recent cosmetic ban in Canada, even though it did, it has brought more awareness in Canada. Most people in Canada don't even know that animal testing occurs. And so it did bring awareness, and it's a long, long overdue law, but it is only cosmetics. And in the big picture, it's a very small part of the animal testing world. So even though it's a step in Canada and definitely something to be celebrated, we've got a long way to go. And I think in the same way that Justify is spreading awareness, I think that's a lot of our job right now as an advocacy organization in Canada, is spreading awareness that animal testing is happening here as well, not just in the US, which most people in Canada like to believe. So
what about, Lori, what about China? I mean, it wanted cosmetics to be, animal testing to be used in cosmetics. Now I've read that they're backing off from that. And
yeah, they are. And if somebody wants to chime in and knows a little bit more than I do, or has read something, by all means, please chime in. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on all of the countries and everything going on at all times. But we did just recently have Kim Passion, who's the program manager for Leaping Bunny, on. She was on one of our town halls, and we chatted a little bit about China, and she said that they are making strides to not necessarily require the animal testing for some cosmetics being sold in China. So and I just want everyone to know, just speaking about cruelty free, I did pop some links in there from our site as well, our community news link, that in case you want to see our other town halls, and the town hall that Maddie and Mallory were on in the past are all on that link as well. We have a link to our page that has alternatives to animal testing. So if there's something you want to look up that, you know, Mallory had said that down the road from where you were working there, they were doing the same kind of things, but they were using other technologies and not harming animals. We've got a link that shows some resources there, as well as a cruelty-free shopping link. So I think that, yeah, China is slowly changing a little bit, but for anybody who knows about shopping cruelty free, and especially in the cosmetic world, you know, a company can certainly say that it's cruelty free, but they may be owned by a parent company who is not cruelty free, or they may be selling in China. And for the most part, China requires, or quote unquote, may require testing on animals. And so there is some progression there, but again, in the same way that it's been slow for Canada, it's definitely a ways away in China there as well. Yeah. Josh, thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you, Lori. I'm someone who's been to the town hall meetings a few times, and I just want to say I really enjoy them. It's always nice to hear everyone speak and share about their experiences. I just wanted to kind of echo back things that I've kind of taken away from it. And I think number one is just, I never really realized how much backlash people got in these kind of situations when we talk about kind of stepping away from the industry and kind of just making different decisions at a certain point. You know, it's hard to hear it because I know it must be hard to talk about it over and over again for you guys. So I just wanted to say that I always appreciate you guys sharing this stuff. I think more people really need to hear about it, and more people would really benefit from understanding what that's really like. To the point that Lindsay had kind of touched on, just it's amazing to me that people can be so concerned with doing the right thing for animals and forget that we need to do the right thing for people too. And it's kind of that combination of things that I think gets overlooked at times. And I'm glad to see that Justify is there to kind of fill that space. Just wanted to say thank you guys. So thanks again.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you. I know you've been to our town halls, and we beyond appreciate your support. So thank you. Thank you so much.
I just want to echo that those comments really mean a lot. And sorry, Josh, I like went to type quickly and then wrote John, my bad, in the chat. So yeah, Josh, thank you so much. Like, it's really, I think, like, comments like yours are things that really help kind of keep us going, especially on those tougher days when you know, we have more challenging engagement. So really appreciate you know, your support and sharing those sentiments.
I'm glad that that kind of stuff exists, because from what you guys have said, and obviously I don't have a ton of insight, it's something that people really need. And so I think it's going to be really helpful. So congratulations. I think you guys really did a good job.
Thanks so much for that.
Definitely.
It's really
Thank you.
nice to hear.
It is. I think community is so important, and that's something we really value at, you know, while we're working in rescue, is that we want to hear from the community and we want to come together, and that's what you guys are doing in a very specific way. And I just think that, just as Josh said, we absolutely have no right to call ourselves compassionate when we're speaking about animals and not extend that compassion to our fellow humans. We just have, it can't be one or the other. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And you guys are doing that. So thank you. Thank you all for being here and sharing. And if any, I'm just curious, does anyone have any further questions? Maybe we'll wrap that up. If there's any links that anybody else wants, Mary and I can certainly grab them, but no, I don't think so. So again, I want to apologize for the technical difficulties. I probably would have panicked a year ago if this happened. Now I was a little nervous, but it's like, okay, as long as we get everybody on here at some point, it'll be great. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for what you're doing. It's been a real pleasure. It's been a pleasure getting to know Maddie and Mallory, of course, over time. And Lindsay, so nice to meet you. And thank you for everyone for joining us, because just as we're speaking about community, that's exactly what we want to do, is bring a community together who want to make a difference for animals and want to do it together as humans. So thank you all very much. We will hopefully see you at our next town hall, and we will chat soon.